Welcome, one and all, to episode 56 of Project Geekology, the show that hasn't figured out a consistent introduction in 56 episodes. I'm your host, Dakota, and I am joined as always with...
Anthony, and I have the Force with me today.
Always. You have to add the always, Anthony. Come on, let's go. Let's get this. We're watching Star Wars today. Or we're talking about Star Wars. I literally just came from watching Star Wars. I am like 5 minutes from the victory ceremony where Han and Luke get their medals, but Chewbacca doesn't. We're really excited to talk about A New Hope, the Star Wars film that started it all. It wasn't even called A New Hope back in the day. It was just Star Wars.
Yeah. George Lucas didn't think that this was going to be a good film. He really just did not think that it was going to be good at all. And he thought that Close Encounters was a better film.
Yeah, so the rumor as it stands was that Steven Spielberg and I was about to say Luke Skywalker. The rumor is that damn it.
The rumor is that Anakin Skywalker...
The rumor is that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were betting on each other's films. The one that got the most money on its opening weekend or whatever, or its theatrical run, would win 10% of its revenue in perpetuity. So, obviously, Star Wars made more money than Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And Steven Spielberg is still raking in that cash. 10% of everything that A New Hope has ever made, which is just an insane amount of money. So, good on Steven Spielberg, bad on George Lucas.
For real. Not many people talk about Close Encounters, but everybody talks about Star Wars.
Close Encounters is a fantastic movie.
Absolutely.
It's a classic Spielberg film, and I would love to talk about it on the show one day. But it's not Star Wars. It's a good movie. It really is. It doesn't have the staying power that Star Wars has, and we're going to talk about why that is. And I have some theories about why Star Wars, the original 1977 film, is such a classic and why it has such just an immense weight on fandom and film history. But before we get into all of that, Anthony, I gotta know, what the heck have you been up to lately?
Absolutely nothing, because I feel like no time has passed since our last recording.
I know, it's only been a week. Usually we go like 2 or 3 weeks before recording. But we are on this Star Wars high right now, and we just gotta talk about Star Wars. I mean, like what's something has had to have happened to you.
Yeah, no, I'm joking. I mean, well, since recording, Star Wars Day occurred.
Yes.
So we had Star Wars Day occur between recordings. And on a belated
May the 4th be with you.
A very belated May the 4th be with you always.
It's May 11th at this point.
So what you're telling me is that May 4th is not always with me?
No. It's only with you once a year. But you can get it belatedly, about a week after.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you're good.
So that day I ended up picking up the Star Wars Timeline book.
Ooh.
So I'm not super deep into it. I'm in the High Republic stuff. I do see some of the criticisms that you have about it not elaborating where some of this piece of information is coming from.
Right.
So you have to kind of research it, like, okay, where does this person come from? And then kind of look for it. But it's like, it'd be nice if you had some sort of like, hey, it came from this.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't remember, folks, I was talking about the Star Wars Timelines book last week. I have a lot of praise for it. I officially finished the book today. As of recording. Yeah, so I read it from cover to cover. It took me over 2 weeks. It's an immense book, 335 pages of just pure lore, like in chronological order. And I have a lot of respect for it. But
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book.
It's amazing. It's probably the best reference book I've ever gotten in my life. It's just, there's so much packed into it. It's hard to deny the amount of work that was put into it. That said, me and Anthony think it could be a little bit better? Yeah. I think that it's not super friendly to people who aren't super in tune with all the books and the comics, because it doesn't tell you where those events are taking place, like in what titles. So it'll give you a brief rundown of what happens in each event, but it doesn't tell you like where you can expand on that information. And I think that's a pretty big flaw in its general conception. But I don't want to harp on that. I'm going to make I'm gonna like do a whole video and article review on Star Wars Timelines, what I loved, what I didn't particularly like, and that big flaw that we just spoke about. But I don't want to harp on that because there's so much else in the book that is worth discussing, you know?
Yes, definitely keep an eye out on that. Dakota's channel is in the show notes, youtube.com/Geekritique.
Anthony, I heard that you watched Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
I did. I saw it. So I saw it the same day you did, but it was your second run of watching it.
Right, yeah. So I had the privilege of being a +1 at a press screening, which was a really awesome experience. I had the opportunity to see them film a little bit early, and it was just burning a hole in my fandom heart. I wanted to talk about it so bad. Every time I thought about the movie, I just wanted to, just tear up and cry and talk about it on Twitter. But Anthony, now that you have seen it, now that you have felt my pain, what are your thoughts?
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good change for an MCU film. That you really did. It hit you really just like, it hit you in the heart, and it made you feel nostalgic too. Even though it's like 3 films, it gives you this sense of nostalgia, especially for the team, the current Guardians of the Galaxy team.
Right, and without getting too spoilery, because I think we want to talk about this in a future show, at least.
Most definitely.
Yeah, I think we should push that up to, an episode soon, because I really do feel like it's worth talking about. But I feel like there's this overwhelming sense of closure for this chapter of the MCU, the James Gunn trilogy, at least, The trilogy plus the holiday special, that was really James Gunn's corner of the cosmic MCU vision, so to speak. And there was something so beautiful about the way that he was able to tell that final story in his collection of films, and it's something we don't see often in the MCU, is like a true ending, and that felt like a true ending.
It did, and I really applaud James Gunn for really putting together such a fantastic film, because since Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and the Christmas special in this film, he had this whole situation where some old stuff was rehashed from Twitter years ago that he he had already kind of put to rest in that time, but somebody internet trolls kind of brought it back up and was trying to and really
cancel him. Yeah, they were
cancel him, and really now he's over in DC. He's taking over the whole DC EU, which I'm hoping that we get some better films on that end. But I do applaud that despite everything, he put it all out there, and it really felt like he put personal emotion into it too, and it felt like you could feel it, that it was like a passion project. Like the first 2 films we got was part of something bigger, but it's kind of its own self-contained thing, and it felt good.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there about, going back to when he was, briefly canceled. There was a couple months where he was removed from the MCU. We didn't really know what was going to happen. It was an interesting time for James Gunn, but ultimately I think that was good for his career. Even though, he ended up coming back to Marvel, in that interim, he got hired by DC to create Suicide Squad, which in turn led to Peacemaker, which in turn led to him being co-CEO of DC Studios. But he got hired back at Marvel to finish his trilogy plus the holiday special. And I think he's in a better spot now than he was on track to be before that. And it's such a cool story. And it's I don't want to say it's like a rags to riches, because it's not. It's just something completely unique to his experience. But he was able to overcome the trolls. And yeah, obviously he said some stupid jokes. That's what led to all of this. But I think part of the human story is forgiveness. If we don't have forgiveness, then what's the point of punishment? So
it's important. There's definitely
it's part of it. Yeah, it's part of it.
And it's not just for the person, it's honestly for yourself too. If you're the person that was affected by something, honestly, getting to the point to where you forgive somebody that did something against you, it can do a lot for you. You know, even if you don't trust that person or don't really want that person in your life, that forgiveness can just, you know, do tons. And, you know, I really do also applaud Disney for at least affording him to be able to finish his story, you know?
True. And I like what you said there about, you know, like being forgiveness being a two-way street, because it really is. You know, we're not going to harp too much on that because I don't even know where this conversation came from. But Guardians 3
Guardians got us in the... I mean, it put you in the field, so...
It did. So we had to go down that storyline. That's where it came from, for sure. Yeah. But you guys should definitely check it out if you haven't already. Obviously, you know where to see it. It's the biggest film right now. But yeah, so I'm excited to talk about that in the future. Anthony, we got to do a show on Guardians 3. Are we doing that next time?
We're going to do that in 2 years. No, I'm just kidding.
2 years? Oh, no.
It's such a random time. No, that sounds good. I think that we can go from Star Wars to Guardians of the Galaxy, you know, more space stuff.
It'll be in a galaxy, it just won't be far, far away or a long time ago. You know, it'll just be like recent and pretty close, but in the galaxy. The Guardians of the
galaxy that we might know more, you know, personally. Maybe only Earth, really.
Yeah,
just Earth.
For sure.
So yeah, I had seen Guardians. I've been playing more of Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Just, you know, really packing in on that Star Wars. And watching A New Hope, you know, preparing for this episode. It's always nice to revisit the old trilogy. I don't really revisit A New Hope all that much. Usually whenever I see Star Wars pop up on TV, it's Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi or something else, but I never really see A New Hope too much, or I just missed it.
Right.
So it was nice coming back to this. And
A New Hope is interesting. It's like, it's so good, but it's a little underrated because it's the original, you know?
Right.
I think everyone has this reverence for it, but nobody respects it on the level that like Empire gets.
Right. Well, you know, it was the first of its kind, or really it was the first Star Wars, so there was a lot of growing pains within it, and Empire was like, I would say Empire was the culmination of all that learning.
Yeah, it was certainly more polished. The world felt a little more lived in. We're going to talk about like lived in feel because there's a lot of life that's in this movie.
Yeah, they do a really good job about that. But yeah, before we continue our conversation on A New Hope, that was pretty much what I've been up to. Lots of Star Wars with Guardians sandwiched in between all that. How about you, Dakota? I know that you went to go see Guardians again with Jen. We just talked about Guardians. What else have you been up to?
Yeah, I've been big into Guardians. That's been one of my passions recently. I love that movie so much. It might actually be my number one MCU film right now. It's just right there at the top of my list. So as soon as the feels go away, it might lessen a little bit. But right now, Guardians number one. What else have I been up to? I've started Star Wars Visions Season 2. I have not finished it, but I like everything that I've seen so far. The reason I haven't finished it is just because of timing. You know, there's also the Young Jedi Adventures series that came out that takes place in the High Republic, but it's aimed towards like a younger audience. So it's not like essential for you or I to check out, but it is an interesting look into the High Republic series. I haven't checked that out yet. I want to. Both Star Wars Visions and Young Jedi Adventures are on Disney Plus right now. But I have been watching a lot of just Dungeons and Dragons not movies, but videos on YouTube. Nice. I've been really interested in the lore of the Forgotten Realms and just D&D in general, because I do want to make a video about the Honor Among Thieves, timeline. Whether it's just, the books that, the prequel stuff for Honor Among Thieves and stuff, but I might touch on, the wider history of Faerun and the Forgotten Realms in that video as well, and just kind of give a brief, a rundown for people who have no idea what D&D is or what the Forgotten Realms is as a campaign setting, because I didn't know. Right. Prior to this, I had heard about the Forgotten Realms. Obviously, I've heard about Faerun, but I had no idea of its conception, history or anything like that. So I might give a brief rundown of like what I've learned over the course of, the 50 videos I've watched over the past week. I've watched a lot of crap.
Wow. Yeah, like I said, my exposure was mostly to the video games that had come out way back when.
Yeah. What, like Baldur's Gate?
Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights.
Yeah.
And there was another game that took place in Waterdeep.
Okay, so all three of those are part of like the Faerun setting, the Forgotten Realms setting, all on like the Sword Coast. So that's cool. Like I didn't have that exposure. I didn't have that exposure when I was.
There's also a D&D MMO that I played with for a little while. It's a Neverwinter one.
We'll be back after a quick break.
I hate talking.
Do you love talking about any topic and are never frustrated during conversations? Then I Hate Talking is not a podcast for you.
But if there are topics that you avoid, then listen to I Hate Talking.
Do you know the definition of every word others use? I Hate Talking is not a podcast for you.
But if you are curious about the definition and historical usage of words, then listen to I Hate Talking.
Do you know about current events and other random topics? Then I Hate Talking is not a podcast for you.
But if you enjoy conversations on a variety of topics, then listen to I Hate Talking.
Listen to I Hate Talking wherever you get your podcasts.
Episodes drop every Thursday. Listen, like, and follow I Hate Talking today.
Yeah, I remember that was like, it was popular around the time of WoW, right? Like when WoW started.
Was it? I don't remember. I hopped onto it maybe about 9-10 years ago because it was brought over to console. So I checked it out. It was a free game and I actually played a good bit of it. It's pretty fun.
Nice.
There is a D&D online though. There's also an actual D&D MMO that's D&D online.
I haven't played any of that. Sounds really fun though. But I did get the core. I ended up getting the core rule books this past week, just because I want to read through them, potentially, start. Because I want to like DM a game eventually. I've played as a player for a couple different campaigns over the years. I've never DM'd before, but I feel like that would be really fun. So just reading through the core rule books and like getting an idea of like what I want to do, whether it's like one of the pre-established D&D settings, like the campaign settings, or like a homebrew game that I just kind of throw up for myself. I think it would be fun to do like a D&D game with some friends.
Dude, that sounds amazing. Yeah, D&D it's such a good time, and it can be a bit of a time commitment, but the way that I see it is that it's like a video game session for me,
Yeah, and it's also, I saw it explained in a way that like sometimes you need that like bridge when it comes to friendships, friendships that last a long time. You need there to be something to like suck you back in again and again and again. And True. D&D is one of those things where like, Jen's been playing a D&D campaign with her coworkers that from a job that she left a year and a half ago,
Nice.
And
that's cool.
I highly doubt that she would be like as in touch with them if it weren't for the D&D campaign that she started a while back. And stuff like that is just so cool to me, like that you can create a friendship based on like this little campaign this adventure that you're running. So yeah, I think it's a fun time. I would like to get more into it and learn more of like the lore behind it, as well as the structure of the game. So yeah, you'll probably hear me talk about Dungeons and Dragons a little bit more in the future.
I'm good for it, man. I'm I'm in the middle of a campaign myself, so I'm all for it.
Nice. Awesome. Should we get into A New Hope?
Yes, let's get into A New Hope.
All right. So I just want to say that watching this movie after seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi, after seeing Rogue One, after seeing how the Clone Wars and the prequels played out, after learning about Han Solo's backstory in Solo: A Star Wars Story, all of these things help this story. It almost like gives you a new visual for everything that happens in this movie. Are you on the same page as me? Like, I kept being like, wow, this makes so much more sense now that I have some visual about what the Clone Wars are, or what the Imperial Senate was, or why, like, Leia calls him Ben Kenobi.
Yes, I agree. The mystery behind some of the stuff, it's gone. Back when it came out in 1977, you heard things like Jedi and Clone Wars, and you're like, man, what happened? What was that? What is the Clone Wars? But now we have seen it. We have that whole prequel trilogy. We have cartoons like Clone Wars and Rebels that have really filled in a lot of space between and before that, you know?
Sure.
Like we said, there was no Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope. It was Star Wars. That's it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is amazing how much has been blown out of this movie. And I looked it up, like, what are the most influential movies of all time? And I was expecting Star Wars to be up there. Can you guess what the number one movie is? It's not a Star Wars movie.
Is it a Spielberg movie?
No, it's before Spielberg. Quite a while before Spielberg. I'll give you a hint. There's a yellow brick road in it.
Oh my gosh, really? Wow. Yeah. Wizard of Oz. You know,
yeah,
that makes sense. Honestly, that really makes sense. Yeah. Because that's one of those movies, you know, one of those older movies like Star Wars. I'd seen movies like The Wizard of Oz, Willy Wonka, like stuff like that. That's stuff that stuck out, stuff that movies that have really influenced stuff from down the line. So that makes sense. It's not that much of a surprise now that you tell me.
Yeah, so the whole thing with, you know, not to get stuck on Wizard of Oz, but it was the first movie that made a huge... It wasn't the first movie in color. Let's start with that. It's not. But it did do something really cool where it starts in black and white, and as soon as she enters Oz, it turns into a color film. And it's the most magical effect probably of all time. It's so cool. The way
it is really cool. Because you think it's a black and white movie.
Right.
So, I mean, just imagine back in that time, you go to watch this movie and you're like, you know, okay, this is a black and white film. And then it does, and you're like back then, they're probably like, whoa, what?
I can't
This is a color film.
I can't imagine what that cinema experience would be like.
Right? I mean, maybe a little bit more reserved, but at least me, it'd be like, whoa, what's going on right now?
But it's got to be, it has to be one of those eye-opening moments of like, wow. You know, like the way that it just opens up a new world to you. So that's the magic of The Wizard of Oz, and it's considered the most influential film of all time. The second film on that list is A New Hope, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, when you think of like how much Star Wars has influenced the pop culture landscape in the past 46 years almost. It's incredible, like, how much has happened. We, you know, you and I, we probably wouldn't even be doing this podcast if it wasn't for Star Wars. We could probably trace, you know, the fandoms that have, like, blown up, you know, out of Star Wars to that film, you know? Like, I feel like each of our loves has, you know, blossomed out of that initial concept that is Star Wars. And if Star Wars hadn't existed, we wouldn't have the MCU, we wouldn't have the Matrix, we wouldn't have different stuff that we take for granted nowadays. And I think that's the power of this movie, is it just opened up so many doors for the lives we live right now. I think that that's a huge feat, and it's so exciting to talk about it in retrospect. And I'm surprised it's taken us 56 episodes to get here.
Well, we did get to Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, which is definitely the best of that trilogy.
And Rogue One, and all the Mandalorian, Book of Boba Fett. Did we talk about Obi-Wan Kenobi? I don't feel like we talked about Obi-Wan Kenobi. We did? Okay.
We did. We covered Obi-Wan Kenobi.
All right. So we've talked about our share of Star Wars.
So I liked what you said about what Star Wars has done and its influence, because I was actually thinking about how, you know, just when I was playing Star Wars Survivor and after watching A New Hope again, I was like, man, like I wouldn't be playing this game if it wasn't for this movie.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like all these little experiences that we have almost on a weekly basis now with Star Wars shows and films and comics and books and all the stuff that they introduce as Star Wars Survivor, the games, would not exist. Like at least this genre of like space western would not exist if it wasn't for that film in 1977 by George Lucas.
And it's crazy because nowadays it's owned by Disney, But before that, Disney wanted a piece of it, and they had taken on and did a ride, Star Tours.
Which is still available to ride today.
Correct.
It's not the same ride. Now it has like, I think it's a Force Awakens.
It's been updated since then, and it kind of updated with each new Star Wars film that had come out. So I had been on Star Tours before they released all of the sequel trilogy movies. And so they kind of updated it as time went. And yeah, man, we wouldn't have Galaxy's Edge, man, without this film.
You know what's funny, actually, speaking about Galaxy's Edge? Because last night I pretty much got to the period in time between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker in the Star Wars Timelines book, and there's a whole page, or there's like half a page dedicated to the rides in Galaxy's Edge. Like, that's canonical Star Wars, and it shows you the timeline of like when the Smuggler's Run ride is and when the Rise of the Resistance ride is. And if you don't understand like what's happening inside each of these experiences, you're not going to understand like how to experience this Star Wars. But I, as a fan who've been on those rides several times, understands that. And then it talks about like the guests of the Halcyon experience this, and then so it's talking about the Star Cruiser as well that nobody can afford.
Right. What about the VR game? Is it included in the book?
So there's the Vader VR game. Is that what you're talking about?
So there's Vader, and then there's also the Galaxy's Edge game, like Black Spire Post or something like that.
I know that the Vader's VR is. I'm sure that the Galaxy's Edge stuff is in there, but because I don't know what the story is in that, I wouldn't be able to differentiate like if that was from that game or not.
Okay.
I do know that there's a High Republic VR experience that is in the High Republic section, so I'm assuming they have all the VR stuff.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that was a pretty fun experience. But yeah, it's crazy. We're talking about this, and man, it all originated from this one film. And like you said, that it's kind of underrated and it's often overlooked, which I totally understand. Like I said, for me, Empire Strikes Back is there's just so much in it that it's hard for me to choose A New Hope over that movie. But I will always go back and say that I cannot diss A New Hope because of what it's done. There would not be an Empire Strikes Back if it wasn't for A New Hope, for the success of A New Hope. So
I don't know what it was about this last viewing of mine, but it really just like heightened. Maybe it was because I had just read all of Star Wars Timelines within the course of 2 weeks, which is a massive book, and I'm on a Star Wars high, but like I felt so connected to the movie in ways that I don't think I've ever felt before. Like there's this running commentary throughout the beginning of the movie that the Senate isn't going to like agree with this, or like the Imperial Senate will hear about this. And you're thinking to yourself, like, what is the Imperial Senate? Oh, that's what Bail Organa and Mon Mothma are a part of, at least in Andor and stuff like that. And that's what, was instated at the end of the prequel trilogy. And it's this democracy that holds the powers of the Emperor in check. And then, shortly, like almost halfway through, Tarkin walks into the room and says that the Emperor just eliminated the Imperial Senate. So now basically democracy is dead at this point. Like all of a sudden, like the Empire, they have this super weapon. They can now like just get rid of whatever holds of democracy they previously had. The Senate is gone. And it's just like this little bit of dialogue that didn't need to be in the film. If this wasn't in the movie, this would not affect anything. But the fact that it exists means that there's so much more backstory that was embedded in the text of this script. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure Lucas didn't think about like what the Senate looked like or how many people existed in it, but the idea that the Senate existed within the script and he had no like designs to like showcase it within the film just goes to show like he had so much written about this, or so much forethought went into this. Same goes for like the Clone Wars, and like that Obi-Wan and Luke's father were like warriors in the Clone Wars, and they fought as Jedi Knights, and there's just so much backstory. Even like the interactions with Aunt Beru and Owen Lars when they hear the name Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Yes.
They look at each other and you're just like,
right.
I get that because I've seen so many movies and shows about this.
Right.
And it makes so much sense.
Right, and I know that the Obi-Wan show, you know, I know that it's not really looked at all that well, but they do a good job of showing, they build up that disdain or that rough relationship that Owen and Obi-Wan have. Yeah. Because of everything that has happened. And Owen just wants to protect Luke because he knows what happened, everything that happened with Anakin, and that Obi-Wan was involved, and so he wants to protect Luke from that. And so now you have a more full picture of why Owen is not really all that favorable of Ben Kenobi.
Even the line where Beru says he's got too much of his father in him, and Owen goes, "That's what I'm worried about." It's so good, because I don't even think George Lucas knew that Darth Vader was Luke Skywalker's father at that point, but it works so well. Like, the chess pieces lined up to just create the best possible outcome for George Lucas in that original trilogy. And it's so fun, like the way that everything lines up like that. And in hindsight, everything is heightened by what comes before. And I think that's the wonder about A New Hope, is because every time that there's a prequel to it, we learn something new about that original movie. We learn something new about the Death Star plans in Rogue One. We learn something new about Leia's relationship to Obi-Wan in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show. We learn something new about the Clone Wars and Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, as well as the Clone Wars series. And the list goes on, and it's such a cool aspect about returning to this movie after a new prequel has dropped, because you see it with new eyes, and it always holds up.
It really does. And just think, man, like back when this movie was filmed, there was nothing riding on it. It's not like how it was when the prequel movies came out. It's not like how the sequel trilogy movies. Really, this was a man making a film that he really had no confidence in. Like, I mean, you know,
it went way over budget.
You know, he was like, he kind of wanted to make a movie that he thought sounded cool, and was like, maybe it might not be cool, but let's just do it anyway. And man, it's crazy how the fandom spanned from, you know, our parents' generation to us to now these newer generations. It's so timeless how these movies, you know, there's kids that will go back and, you know, watch these old films, you know?
Yeah, I know.
Because it's part of the story. And, you know, it's Star Wars. Like, you can't go wrong with Star Wars. Yeah, sure, you can mess up something in Star Wars, but like you said before, there's going to be something that comes out that fixes some mess up that they've done. Whether it's a book, a TV show, you know, even an audiobook. Let's be real. Like, there's audiobooks that have no actual like book attached to it. Like the Dooku one.
Right. Dooku Jedi Lost. Yeah. And that's a great one.
And those are like listening to, it's like listening to Star Wars radio. Like how I would imagine what radio was like back before TV. Like, that's what listening to those are.
Yeah, they've made a couple audio dramas now that are really, really interesting. There's one called Tempest Runner. I think it's also written by Cavan Scott. Dooku Jedi Lost is a Cavan Scott audio drama. Tempest Runner follows Lorna D. She's one of the Tempest Runners of the Nihil that we meet in Light of the Jedi in the Phase 1 High Republic books. That's like the backstory of her life. That's an interesting one. And Phase 2 of the High Republic, they have a new one called The Battle of Jedha by George Mann. And it's not my favorite of the three, but it's really interesting, like learning about this huge battle that happens on the planet of Jedha, you know, where we have Jedha City. It explains like why that big Jedi statue is like toppled over in Rogue One. It's a really impressive story. I think there's one more. I forget who wrote it, but it's the Dr. Aphra audio drama that kind of like it redoes some of the comic books, the Dr. Aphra comic books and the Darth Vader comic books. From 2015 and 2016, and it like puts it all into one story. It's cool. So yeah, Star Wars has dipped into that as well, the audio dramas.
You get to experience Jedha and Jedi Survivor too. It's pretty cool.
Oh, sick. I really gotta get it. I gotta get into it for sure.
You really, really do. And all right, so New Hope. Let's talk about the cast, because Mark Hamill, Carrie Fisher, Harrison Ford weren't really big actors and actresses. Yeah, they were nobody coming into this film.
I think Harrison Ford had been in a couple things up until this point, but it wasn't.
I believe so.
He wasn't by any means a household name. Obviously, neither were Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher, but now they are, staples to not only the genre but the film, but like Hollywood. Carrie Fisher just last week on May the 4th got her Hollywood star on the Walk of Fame, which is a nice tribute to her. But yeah, this cast was seriously like they were fresh.
They were. And I mean, since then, man, Mark Hamill, he's done stuff. He's done a lot of voice actor stuff, especially he's like one of the most popular voice actors for the Joker. And Harrison Ford he's done a lot. Blade Runner, Indiana Jones. I mean, one of the biggest things, which is, it's actually cool because he kind of stayed within the Lucasfilms camp, but it was directed by Spielberg. So I think it's really cool that George Lucas and Steven Spielberg had such a close friendship that they had like that partnership where he's like, yeah, I'm gonna direct, under your banner, that kind of thing.
For sure. So. Yeah. And it's wonderful that we're getting another indie film soon too.
Yes. Yeah. Wait. Dude, I'm gonna go to the movie theater to see that. And dude, you know what's, and Carrie Fisher's been a lot, but believe it or not, you remember I've been watching through Smallville?
Yeah.
Dude, she pops up in Smallville as an editor of the Daily Planet.
Oh, I forgot about that. Are you serious?
Yes, dude. I was like,
what?
Carrie Fisher, what are you doing here?
Good for her.
Yeah, man, that was that.
She was also in Blues Brothers.
What happened?
She was also in Blues Brothers. She's in a couple things. I don't think she had. Well, yeah, she doesn't have the career after that someone like Harrison Ford does. But she definitely is a staple of Hollywood past this movie, and it's no wonder because she does a fantastic job. So do Mark Hamill and Harrison Ford. That cast is they have so much chemistry.
They do.
I don't know. That's like lightning in a bottle, that three people have so much chemistry like that. It's amazing.
You hear stories like, I believe it was Mark Hamill's roommate that was supposed to go to that audition for Luke Skywalker.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Yeah, I don't know that story. But Hollywood back then is like it's crazy, so I wouldn't put it past them. Let's talk about some of the deaths that happened in this movie, because there are a couple. Let's start with Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru.
Man, they
got toasted.
Bro, I think that they had some of the most brutal deaths in all of Star Wars, man. Like, I mean, they're skeletons, man.
They are skeletons crawling out of their house. It's actually just like horrific, and the fact that like Luke, who's been raised by these people, gets over it within the course of a day is really like
dude, isn't it insane like how he's like, man, they're dead. All right, so I'm gonna go with you.
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with you. We're gonna learn about the Force. We're gonna join the rebellion, Alderaan, right? Yeah, let's go. Let's get it. But then Ben, Obi-Wan, who he's known for a day, die. It's funny in retrospect because this doesn't really make sense from like a character perspective. But like Obi-Wan Kenobi dies. He sacrifices himself for Luke and Leia when he sees them on the Death Star. And it's a powerful death, obviously. That's the first time someone has like disappeared, I guess canonically in Star Wars, like their body anyway.
Yeah.
It's a cool moment, but later, after they've saved Leia and everything, after they've taken the plans to the rebel base on Yavin 4, Leia confronts Luke, and Luke is feeling down on himself. He's just like, I just really miss Ben, or something like that. And Leia gives him this like reassuring like look, and I'm thinking to myself, Leia literally just lost her whole planet. And Luke's complaining about Ben. It's amazing
that he doesn't have like any real attachment to, which, dude, let me tell you, Alec Guinness, man.
Oh, he does such a good job.
He really...
let's before we talk about Alec Guinness, let me just reiterate that this is obviously a qualm that I have in retrospect. Like, most people watching this movie aren't going to see that issue, that flaw in the movie, because it doesn't really matter. It's the only people that they mourn in the movie are the people that are on the screen for the longest. So that makes sense. Ben Kenobi was Luke's mentor, so obviously that's part of his hero's journey, so he's going to mourn that character. And until he stops mourning that character, he can't move on, basically. So that makes sense. All right, so going back to what you were saying, Alec Guinness, dude, such a good actor.
Yes, and I mean, prior to that, he had a career. You know, he had a long movie career up until that point. I would say him and the actor that played Tarkin, I think,
Peter Cushing. Yeah,
Peter Cushing. He did too. Yeah, Peter Cushing. He had a long career too.
Yeah, actually, Peter Cushing's Tarkin is like one of my favorite characters. He's just like, he's such a sinister dude that has so much character and like personality.
I know a lot of people that like him too. Do you think that's... I would say that you see a lot of that in Thrawn, kind of. Like, he's got that sinister... Thrawn is very sinister and very calculated in the same way that Tarkin is.
Yeah, it's different but similar. Like, I see what you're saying.
They're different people. Absolutely. They're different, and they have their own... There's things about them that make them their own people, but there are some core similarities that they have that, you know, honestly...
I would say maybe Tarkin's a little more stoic and aggressive. Thrawn is a little more contemplative, and he'll wait for his moment to strike. Whereas Tarkin is a little more, I think, vicious is the word. I don't know. Like, he's more like a cobra ready to strike. But I do see like the temperament is very similar. Like the way that they hold themselves, their presence on the screen, even though we haven't seen a live action Thrawn yet.
We will soon.
We will very, very soon, and I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, I totally see what you're saying, and I think that maybe that's why Thrawn has such a presence, because it's so ingrained in like the Star Wars DNA. Because, you know, Tarkin was basically that character, that calculating just general that you just did not want to mess with.
But your boy gets blown up, man.
Really quickly, he got too cocky.
he really did. And you know, in this film, we actually get introduced to them before we even see the main stars, but C-3PO and R2-D2.
I was surprised by that. I didn't even like consider that they were the first two like speaking roles in the film. But C-3PO and R2-D2 are probably the stars of, you know, the entire Skywalker saga. They were there the entire time.
Dude, they were there for so long. Luke talks about how he's cleaning up R2-D2 and he's talking about the carbon scoring. And I'm just thinking about, I'm like, yeah, man, like R2-D2 throws down. Like, I mean,
yeah, he's been shot at a lot.
C-3PO's more the, like, you know, he got shot at and probably got grazed, you know, here and there. But R2-D2 has literally been shot at, like, worked on, you know, fixing his ship while being shot at. Remember Phantom Menace?
Yeah.
He's fought in the way that he could. R2-D2's literally fought, so yeah, like he's like, oh yeah, you guys have seen some action. I'm like, yeah, especially R2-D2. R2-D2 has definitely seen some action.
Yeah, I think at this point C-3PO's memories have been like very recently erased. Because he goes, we've been in a few battles, I think. So it's interesting. I forget exactly when his memory was erased, or like what the most recent memory wipe was. But his memory is fascinating. But you know what I was actually thinking when I was reading Star Wars Timelines? I got to the Rise of Skywalker section, and there's that wonderful moment in the Rise of Skywalker where they have to reboot, or they have to erase a section of C-3PO's memories to unlock like the Sith language. You know, we're getting way ahead of the timeline at this point. But I think, and there's a line where C-3PO goes, or like Poe asks C-3PO, what are you doing, 3PO? And he goes, taking one last look, sir, of my friends. Wouldn't it have been such a great idea to like go back to the beginning of like Star Wars from like the Phantom Menace till now and show like from C-3PO's perspective, like all of a sudden he's getting all these memories rebooted in his system right before it gets wiped out, like little Annie in Phantom Menace, you know, stuff that happens in all these films, but like from his perspective. That would have been so cool.
But would he have remembered that though? Because like, I mean, he had that part of his mind wiped.
Well, they had to like reboot his whole memory chip, if I remember correctly.
Oh,
so they could have worked it in somehow, you know, and then like all of a sudden all those memories get wiped again. So it would have been, I think that would have been a cool, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think that would have been like a really, you know, wonderful way to like recap a little bit of the Star Wars story from C-3PO's perspective.
Right, and man, Anthony Daniels, who plays C-3PO, really plays that character well, like, and because it's him in, you know, in that suit, he does it so movies. Well, walking like a droid.
Yeah,
he has that movement, that talk, like he plays that role very well. I know that C-3PO is not a lot of people's favorites, but I really like Anthony Daniels, and I think he knocks that. They gave him the role, and he exceeded that role.
Absolutely. I mean, he's been in all of them, all 9 Star Wars films, saga films anyway, and it's wonderful to see that they've kept him.
Yes,
as long as they did, and yeah, he's such a funny character, dude. The scene where they're in the trash compactor and like R2-D2 stops it and they start celebrating, and C-3PO's like, listen to them, R2, they're dying.
Dude, that scene always gets me. He's like, oh no, they're dying. Yeah, like he's like, I can't listen.
So good.
Yeah, no, that's hilarious. Oh, and when we see Darth Vader in the beginning of the film, that, you know, after seeing Rogue One, he literally just mowed down a bunch of rebels.
Yeah.
Just thinking back, it's crazy. Like, if you go to watch Rogue One and then you go to watch A New Hope, you're watching pretty much like one long continuous film. That's maybe what missing about what, like, not even like any time, right? Not even like a few minutes.
So there is a little bit of a time jump, and let me explain it, because they get boarded by Vader's ship, by Vader's Star Destroyer, but then they get the plans onto the Tantive V4, Leia's ship. They give it to Leia, and then they escape from the Star Destroyer.
Right.
And Leia, in that moment, realizes the only hope that they have is to bring these plans to Obi-Wan Kenobi. So she immediately departs to Tatooine. Vader's ship tracks them to Tatooine and overtakes them again. So I don't know exactly how much time passes. It could be a couple minutes, it could be a couple hours, but it's a very short amount of time.
Right, like it literally happened in like the same time, you know, like...
Yeah.
No. Yeah, you're right. Like, I remember them escaping at the end of Rogue One, right after Vader mowed down like all those rebels. But like literally, that just happened that same day that they escaped. You know, it's and
insane. There's a line in this movie that I had never considered before that works with that ending to Rogue One, where C-3PO goes, he says something along the lines of, they'll surely get us this time, or something like that, and it explains that this isn't the first time that the ship has been captured. And it's like, wow, there's so much backstory here that they could work off of, and they clearly like utilize that for all of these other projects that are like prequels to this movie, and it's a wonder. You know, it's amazing how they've weaved this story and expanded it in all these different directions.
I guess what my thing with this film, I would say with this film, I think the reason why for me it's not like my favorite of all Star Wars is because you know how it is, man. Like the first of anything, you have to establish the world, you have to build up the characters, and at sometimes it can feel a little clunky, and you're still trying to figure out the personality of what it's going to be. So it's felt throughout this film, and I understand, I get it, but still, for what it's still a very like it's still a spectacular film, and what they learned from this really just built up an amazing sequel.
I also want to touch a little bit about like how this movie is. It feels so lived in. You know, I've spoken a lot. I've spoken a lot about how the world and the lore seems like a breathing, living lore. You know, like I spoke about the Clone Wars. I spoke about the Imperial Senate being destroyed. I spoke about all this and that. But the actual feel of the movie, the grittiness, like the droids, no matter like what scene you see them in, are covered in dust, are like there's like grime like coating their like R2-D2's dome. They look cool and they look futuristic, but they look realistic because they're from a dirty galaxy. That's just
right. Luke's clothing is dirty too.
Yeah, when Leia is rescued off of like out of her prison cell, like her entire wardrobe has been, there's like black soot all over her outfit if you look on it. But even more than that, like when we get to Yavin 4, the moon on Yavin, even the fact that like Lucas decided not to just call it Yavin, you know, like they could have had the rebel base on the planet Yavin. He was just like, nah, it's cooler if this is the fourth moon of Yavin. It's like the little moon outside. It's just like, why are you even thinking about this? But I'm so glad you did, because it feels so realistic, because it's just like, what's the next level of this lore? And it's like he's always finding it. And a little detail that they show on Yavin 4 is the exterior of the rebel base in this like ancient pyramid that exists on Yavin 4. And we have no idea, I mean, I have no idea like who the builders were of this ancient pyramid, but like inside the pyramid is where the rebels have their base. They have their huge like hangar with all their X-Wings and stuff. But it's like, where did this pyramid come from? It's just an unexplained thing that we're just left with, and we can assume that the rebels have taken over these abandoned ruins in the middle of this forest jungle, and it's almost got like Mayan or Aztec vibes to it.
Right, I was gonna say, I think the Mayans built it.
Yeah, it feels lived in.
Space Mayans.
Like, it's the level of creativity and forethought when it came to the lore and the lived-in feel of the galaxy is unparalleled up until this point, and I think that's part of why this movie is so influential in the way that we view science fiction and fantasy. And I think that's why like we appreciate it so much from an aesthetic point of view as well. I don't know, everything feels unique.
Dude, something that and this kind of like, I can't believe this like blew past me, but dude, we didn't even talk about the movie score, man. John Williams and the London Symphony Orchestra.
Yo,
dude, come on,
man.
Like
that first opening of just like the Star Wars logo just blowing past on the screen, and then the crawl is just it's so iconic at this point. I wish we were old enough to appreciate that for the first time in 1977, you and I. Obviously, we were not even a dirty thought at that point. But it's amazing. Dude, John Williams. I can't believe he did 9 films.
John Williams, yeah, man. And way more than that. Like, he had done... Did he do the first 2, or is it just the first Harry Potter movie?
He did the first 3 Harry Potter movies.
The first 3? Okay. He did Jaws, which was a couple years before
Star Wars,
yeah. He's done a lot. He's done Indiana Jones.
All the Indiana Jones, yeah.
Yeah, man.
Jurassic Park. Pretty much most of Spielberg's stuff, honestly, he's done.
So I would say that something that I feel that really contributes to the success of, honestly, a TV show, a film, even like video games, is how well it's scored. And that really like draws me in, because dude, I will sit down and I'll listen to a really good movie, video game, TV show score. Like, I'll sit there, listen to it. Like, I mean, you know me, man. I'll listen to the Star Wars, Star Wars soundtrack. I'll do video games, TV shows. It's just, you know,
there's really nothing like the Star Wars soundtrack, the original score. I mean, obviously, like, John Williams has done magic again and again and again with the Star Wars universe, and, you know, outside of it, Harry Potter, Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, but
Galaxy's Edge too. He composed.
Yeah, he did the Galaxy's Edge. He did the Obi-Wan Kenobi theme for the show. He's the lifeblood of this entire franchise, and his music is synonymous with not only this film, but like how we remember these moments in our heads. Because like, if you're remembering like a moment in Star Wars, most likely you're subconsciously thinking about the Star Wars theme, or the Force theme, or Yoda's theme, or something like that. The Princess and the Scoundrel theme. There's so many wonderful moments in these movies' scores that are just perfect.
Honestly, one of the reasons why I like Empire Strikes Back so much is that Hoth medley. Dude, it's so good.
The Empire Strikes Back is where we got the Imperial March, which is synonymous with, you know, like the Empire. I don't know how like that isn't even existent in the original Star Wars movie, but like, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Dun, dun,
yeah,
dun, dun,
yeah,
dun, dun,
yeah. I
dun,
know
dun.
exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, John Williams really did perform magic, and he really was able to increase. Like it's just, he made each scene and each like major moment in these films far more grander than what they were with how well he scored them.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, sure enough, I'm looking it up. John Williams won Best Original Score for Star Wars A New Hope back in 1970, or it was just Star Wars at that time. But yeah, his work was recognized immensely in that movie, and that's so cool.
It really contributed to the success of that film, man. It
100%.
was important, yeah.
Yeah, so I definitely have newfound respect for this movie, and I wish we you know, like, we talked a little bit more about like the little individual scenes in this, but I think talking about this film as a whole is fun because it's such a lovely retrospective, almost 46 years later, like how much stuff has, you know, spawned from this, how our appreciation to this movie that we've both probably seen like 100 times.
Absolutely.
You know? It's a fantastic film. I think on the next time that I like rank the movies, I might rank it a little bit higher than I previously do.
And it's hard to not talk about Star Wars A New Hope and not talk about everything else that it spawned. And it's not out of disrespect of the film, but really just because we recognize that we would not have this amazing universe if it wasn't for this film, and for Lucas putting this out, even though he wasn't 100% sure on it, even though he betted against this film.
Yeah, it's insane. Yeah, it's amazing like what we have now because some guy in California decided he was going to make this movie. It's amazing. I'm at a loss for words because it's my first love as a kid was Star Wars. You know, before I was a Marvel fan, before I got into Pokemon, before I got into any of that stuff, I was a Star Wars fan. And
yeah,
it's amazing to still be talking about it almost 30 years later.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say the same. I think that was I would say that's one of my earliest loves too, up there with like maybe gaming, because I started gaming at a young age.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that. Yeah,
that was
knowing your father. I know. I knew exactly what what your first love was.
So, well, I mean,
that was fun, man.
Absolutely, man. But yeah, it's, you know, we didn't even talk about something. And actually, I want to touch a little bit on it. Something that Star Wars did was it used technology, or established like technology that, dude, it was like almost impossible to do this stuff. This blaster fire, these massive looking ships like that they used with scale models. Yeah. And how they established
we didn't even touch upon this. Oh my gosh. This is such an important part of this movie. Yeah. Wow.
And I mean, Star Trek, they did some impressive stuff, but Star Wars really like took that and like blew it up on a massive scale.
It made it cinematic.
Yeah.
It made it cinematic. One thing that I will always respect about George Lucas, even to a fault, is that he will always, or at least when he was making Star Wars movies, his his priority was to push the genre as far as it could go when it came to pushing tech in films. And when with this film, it was, what can we do with miniatures? He even incorporated a little bit of CGI in there, like very early CGI when it came to like the computer models of the Death Star and like the visualization system of the gunner array.
Yeah, oh yeah, those were really cool.
And that's extremely early CGI. That was computer generated images. Obviously, like in the 90s, they tried to, well, they didn't try, they did. They redid a couple scenes early on, like especially in Tatooine, where they updated them, and I feel like that was a mistake, but I understand it. George Lucas was always trying to do the next best thing to make his movie as realistic as possible. But and going into the prequels, like with the advent of digital photography, like I think The Phantom Menace was the first film to use digital cameras for a couple scenes, and then the Attack of the Clones was the first film to fully use digital cameras. Jar Jar was the first fully CGI character in a movie, or in a live action movie. There's so much, or photorealistic CGI character, I should say. Anyway, yeah, so George Lucas's whole shtick when he was making films was to push the genre as far as it could go. And this film pushed the genre leaps and bounds.
It really did. And when you go back and watch it, and I know that some of this stuff was updated since then, but even then, just knowing what they did with the scale models and how they made it look so realistic, and even back then how they were able to produce the look of the lightsaber and the look of blaster fire, it's like back then it's not like how we can do it now, where you could practically do that on your phone now. No, dude. Yeah. Like, you had to put so much work into it back then.
Yeah, that's true. That is amazing. Yeah, even like we take for granted the lightsaber, like how cool the lightsaber is. And yeah, the fight between Vader and Obi-Wan is nothing like the fights we see with lightsabers nowadays. But I just want to put myself in that audience and just experience like those lightsabers lighting up for the first time and meeting, and like what that sound effect is, that like that arc of almost like electricity like meeting. It's so cool, like how they were able to do all that. And I don't know, it looks so realistic and so cool.
That scene was definitely a tribute to Lucas's love for those old samurai films. It was like two samurai fighting.
Yeah, for sure. And actually that's how like the samurais would even hold their swords and stuff. It's an interesting thought, like how like he came up with these different inspirations and like put it all into this movie.
Absolutely. That's why whenever I see an artist incorporate samurai, like the mixture of Star Wars and samurais, it always looks so cool and it fits so well. Because the armor is very, like, think about it, it could very well translate into that type of armor if you wanted to.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. It's so cool. Is there anything we wanted to talk about besides that?
No, I think, well, at least I didn't. Like, I'm glad that we were able to talk about like the technology, and
I'm always amazed by like the level of creativity in Star Wars, not only like with the lore, which we talked heavily about, but we get to that cantina scene early on and there's 20, 30 different creatures, different races of aliens. All of them have their own little shtick. Some of them are like smoking hookahs. Some of them are little weird freaks with big cups of blue milk. Some of them are playing instruments in the background. And it's just it's a breath of fresh air. Like, it opens up the entire galaxy to us, because up until this point, we've seen that there are robots that we sometimes call droids. We see that there are Dark Lords wearing masks. We see that there are like soldiers, but they're all humanoid soldiers wearing like the stormtrooper outfits. Yeah. And then we see humanoid species. But as soon as we enter that cantina, wow. Well, actually, we've also seen Tusken Raiders and we've seen Jawas up until that point. But we see the whole bevy of the universe, the galaxy, and all the aliens that exist in it.
Right. It's so much more than what we've seen. It's like it's a galaxy that's filled with so many different species. And, you know, actually, I'm glad that you bring up that cantina scene, because remember when C-3PO and R2-D2 go in, the barkeep says that we don't serve your kind here, like kicking out the droids. And that kind of makes you think that, you know, would you say that that's PTSD from the Clone Wars?
Ooh, I never thought about that. I like that theory, though. I could picture that. Like, there's a little bit of, you know, some prejudice against binary beings.
It's not droids. The first time that it wouldn't be the first time that we've seen it. I mean, Mando had that same prejudice against it because of him actually experiencing it firsthand. You know, who knows? Maybe that barkeep was on a planet that was affected by the Clone Wars and saw what happened when, you know, between these clashes between the clones and the droids. You know, there's just so much that you could draw from Star Wars. So many theories. And sometimes these theories are confirmed, sometimes they're denied, and sometimes they're just like, you know what? They can live within our minds, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much to this original movie. And honestly, like, I could keep bringing up different scenes and points that are just fun to talk about. Like R3, the red astromech that, you know, just explodes in front of the Lars homestead. We could have a whole discussion about how that's the same droid in Mando Season 3. But I think we should table this discussion because we're well past an hour at this point.
Let's go into 3 hours. No, I'm just kidding.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to us here for our 56th episode. A New Hope, Star Wars. This whole fandom is something that we both hold near and dear to our hearts, and we can't wait to talk about The Empire Strikes Back. We haven't talked about Solo yet. We can go back and talk about Solo. But yeah, thank you so much. If you have any comments, any thoughts, please be sure to either comment to us on any of our socials. You can find those in the show notes down below. You can find us at pgeekology on Twitter and project_geekology on Instagram. Is that what it is?
No, it's just Project Geekology together.
Okay, and you can find us at Project Geekology on Instagram. And yeah, you can find all this information on our show notes. But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your reviews of the podcast, especially if it's a 5-star review. That really helps us out, gets us into more people's, you know, podcast applications, because the algorithm pushes us up a little bit. So we always thank you for that, and we appreciate any feedback, guys.
Absolutely. And if you know any friends that would really enjoy a geeky podcast, share it with them. And a shout out to Alex for actually joining the conversation on Twitter.
Yeah, thanks, Alex.
Yes, thank you so much. We love to continue the conversation about our podcast, and yes, with everything that Dakota said, also go check him out on his YouTube channel, Geekritique, and we'll see you next week. We'll bring you Guardians of the Galaxy next time.
Yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. We're excited to talk about it. Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Bye.